Okay, so Russian hackers steal 1.2 billion passwords and logins from 500 million websites. Target, Kmart, Home Depot, and many others confirmed that their credit card information was compromised. Unfortunately, a lady that worked at a business for many years is charged with embezzlement, taking money from the company. Headlines are out there with fraud, unfortunately consistently, because for some, this has become their business. They don't have regular jobs, this is their job. So today, my plan is that we have a discussion about what you can do personally from your business to protect your money and yourself from some of these crimes and fraud. So we're not going to hit all of them, and this isn't even all of them, but this is just a small list of some of the fraud techniques that are out there. And we will talk about some of them today, but you've got embezzlement, cyber fraud, mail fraud, wire fraud, the ATM fraud, when you walk up and there's a skimmer on the ATM machine, tax fraud, online scams, check fraud, identity theft, we hear a lot about that, sweepstakes scams, phishing, and that is pronounced like phishing, and we'll talk about that, credit card fraud, con games, and Ponzi schemes. And that list could continue, but those are some of the more popular methods. All of these frauds really have one thing in common, and that is deception by the fraudster for personal or financial gain. So it doesn't matter how they're getting there, they're really looking for that deception to get gain. So, how many in this room, by just even a raise of hands, and this is for everybody, all of our participants, has had either attempted fraud or fraud on your business account or your personal account? You see 60%, so 6 out of 10 people have had some sort of fraud. Now granted, this was from the American, or the Association of Financial Professionals, their survey, but 6 out of 10, or 60% of the organizations that they surveyed had some sort of fraud. For those businesses that actually had fraud and loss from fraud, you can see the average was $23,100. And that's the average. So you know that there's larger fraud. And unfortunately, part of my job, I see this. I see the person that has their debit card compromised or a business account that has had their data compromised. And we're going to talk about some of those things as we go. And then this one is probably the astounding number for me, and it continues to grow year after year. But $3.5 billion has been lost on online fraud in 2013, and that comes from the CyberSource online survey. And unfortunately, when you look at these statistics, yes, we might not be that business or that person that's lost that $23,100, but we all are losing because businesses have to increase their fees, their revenue, their products, what they're selling to make up for the fact that there's fraud in the system. So again, what we're going to talk about today are ways that we can work to protect ourselves against it. Because again, we can't stop the fraud. We're going to talk about different things that happen. I can't stop the fraudsters from doing what they're doing. But the goal is to stop the loss from fraud. And on some practical common sense things, there are things that we're going to talk about that you can do to kind of help prevent the fraud from even starting. So let's take a look at this picture. We probably know Pam from the office. She's sitting here just waiting. She's a receptionist waiting to help. So if we take a look at this photo with the mindset of fraud, what do you see, or there are anything in this picture that you see that could either perpetuate a fraud act or be something that's concerning to you? Anybody have anything?
The mail on the desk. Yeah.
Exactly, the mail on the desk. And you'd be surprised how many businesses sit with the mail on their desk, waiting because we don't want to inconvenience the postal person from coming to pick it up. But if Pam gets up and walks away, suddenly that's there. Or you'd be surprised if you have a check-in. Think about yourself, even as an individual. You go to sign in that you're there for your appointment. And right next to the sign-in page are the checks or the mail going out. Very easy for somebody to just randomly select one of those items and maybe be lucky enough to pick up one that has a check in it. So, good catch. Anything else that you can see in here?
Her computer screen can be seen if she's lower than the person standing.
Exactly. So you've got the computer screen, not only location, and we know that sometimes the workspace that you have, that's really the only place. Maybe for her that needed to be rearranged, or at least let's make sure there's a screensaver or she locks her screen when she gets up to leave. But maybe even a slight tilt won't be as visible here. But good one.
There's a lot of files and stuff also. That's probably an open thing.
Yes, over here, seeing that these are open. And who knows what's in there? Sensitive information. So yes, over here. This, not sure what it is, but that could very easily be a stack of checks, deposit slips, maybe receipts and mail that's come in for her. So again, here we can see that we might not know, possibly could be locked, but right now we don't see locking devices on the cabinets. So possibly a problem there. Don't know what's in here, but confidential information. Might be her, the garbage versus the shred.
Yeah, there you go.
So just things, when you go back to your offices, think about it. It may be, hello.
Hello. Sorry, I'm late.
Oh, no. Hop on board. I don't think I've given you my handout, so. There you go.
Thank you.
We just got started. So certainly, when you go back, think about when you walk in, especially if you've been gone for a second, walk in and kind of take a look. If there's somebody that maybe you have a cleaning company, and again, not picking on anybody, but remember, you may feel very comfortable with your office and your setup. Or if you're in your home, how is that set up if somebody were to come in? So again, just be mindful when you go back to see what kind of setup you have and anything that you can kind of protect with. So, we're going to talk again about things that you can do. And as everybody probably has their favorite top 10 list, this wouldn't be the David Letterman, but we will have the practical top 10. We mentioned Pam's outgoing mail. So put your mail in the P.O. box. Now that may not always be the most convenient to do, just to drive by and drop it there. But if it is available, that's certainly better than leaving it out on a counter or someplace where it's readily available for people to take. Keep your checks in a locked area. You'd be surprised how many people keep their check stock right next to that printer. Convenient, easy to do, but also easy for somebody to grab the check even from the middle. Might not be that they take the top check, but they take the check from the middle. And then it might be weeks or even months, depending on how often you write checks, before you even realize that that check is missing. They certainly have been able to get all your information, as well as that range of checks that you're in. So keep them locked up, takes just an extra second, and that extra second is certainly a shorter time period than what has to happen if your account's compromised. Secure confidential information. You're responsible really certainly for your information, but you're also responsible for your customers, your vendors, people that give you information. So be mindful, just because you have your information out, maybe you're preparing your deposit and you get interrupted, if people can walk by your work area, they're not only seeing maybe your information, but also who's paying you, vendors, information. It's very quick to be able to look at a check and see a logo of the bank they're using. You can get routing numbers and information on the internet very easily. So it's just a matter of them determining if they can quickly find an account number and memorize it. They've got that intel to be able to create a fraudulent item. So just be mindful of that. Shred versus garbage. There's not really a set definition of which, but think about it. You can put shred is typically information that has sensitive material, account numbers, information from your vendors. If that's something that you would not want anyone to really have access to, shred. Doesn't cost as much as it once did for the small shredders to cross-cut, or even as you grow a larger firm to come in, certainly the bank has to have even maybe a higher level of shred that we have. We produce a lot of it. But the difference between the shred and the garbage, because there are, as we would term them, dumpster divers, people that go and literally go to garbage areas and dumpsters and grab bags. They know they're getting trash, maybe the Pal's wrapper or the McDonald's bag, but in there they're also hoping they're getting maybe a voided check that you just shredded with 2 slices of fingers and easy to put back together. Or applications. Unfortunately, we all still get credit card applications in the mail that have some information. Wouldn't be that hard for me to pick that up and apply as you, with my address. So just be thinking about what you're putting in the garbage versus what you're putting in your shred area. And if you do have shred, try not to be like Pam, where it's just in a box available, stacking up for that once a day. And you can even talk to your bank. We have people that will bring occasionally their shredded items. We don't take huge barrels of it, but if you've got some items that you are making your deposit, but you also have a few items to shred, your bank is also another resource that might be able to take that for you. So, this one most people don't really think about, but use a dedicated computer for your financial and your sensitive logins. Really, the FBI says this is the #1 way to protect against malware and cyber fraud that is created from getting a virus. So it's a dedicated computer that you would log into, whether that's your brokerage account, your bank account, financial information, secure information. You're not surfing the web on this. You're not really even answering emails. It's a dedicated computer. Computers don't cost, again, everything does cost, so I don't want to make it sound, but they're not as expensive as they used to be. And you really don't need to maybe add Word and Excel and your other applications to it. You really just want a dedicated computer that'll allow you to transmit and get secure information. And like I said, the FBI says that's the #1 way to protect on your financial position, is using a dedicated computer. Avoid public Wi-Fi for sensitive accounts. Again, it's wonderful that we can get our information anywhere. Wi-Fi has its place, but when you're logging on, that is not a secure network. So keep that in mind as you're using, Starbucks or Panera, great places, but watch, what you are accessing when you're using the Wi-Fi network. And be wary of videos and downloads. We all love them, those crazy emails and videos. Oh, check this one out. And it might even be from friends and people you know. But videos and downloads are the most embedded place for fraud, or viruses to get in to be able to get fraud. Keystrokes, where you actually would download that. Next thing you know, you go log on. They've now captured your username and your password by being able to get keystroke technology. So, doesn't mean that those aren't fun videos and downloads, but just be mindful of what you're getting from them. Also make sure that you keep your antivirus and your spyware software on your computer and up to date. A lot of people have it where it is on the computer, and yes, you downloaded it, but is it up to date? Because those companies are consistently looking for what are the viruses out there, what are the vulnerabilities, what are maybe a patch or an ad that they need to add on, and most of the time there's not a cost for you to download the most current version. They obviously do upgrades, and there might be a cost when they do larger, because they're looking for some revenue on their business side. But keeping it up to date is important, and a lot of people are not running the most current. And social media. Social media is a great source, whether that's LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest. But keep in mind, if you are a smaller business and you're using that as a function, that's wonderful. But make sure that if you have other employees, that you have a policy as well, whether that's information that they're using, whether they're surfing and playing during lunch hour and going and finding the videos or the things on there. And so social media has a great place, but also there can be fraud perpetrated through the connections that come from some of those. So again, just be mindful of that. And as you grow and have other employees, setting parameters around expectations in that area can be helpful as well. And then phishing. Phishing is a technique that has been around for a while now, but it is where you get an email that looks as if it's coming from the business or the organization that it's pretending to be. Typically, it has a link in there, and if you hover around that link, you'll notice it has nothing to do. Might be that it's coming from the bank or the Federal Reserve. There was one where people who were paying their taxes were getting a notice that their login or their credentials weren't correct. You see it with eBay and Amazon where it says, oh, you need to update, something's wrong with your account, click this link and correct it. Well, that link really isn't representing that particular company. It's the fraudsters trying to get information. And so, again, making sure that you're watching that. If you get one and you think it could be valid, maybe you're working on something with that business, don't follow the link from that email. Go directly to the website, connect from there, and then find the information that they're wanting you to update. So, and there's more information on that in your little handout as far as a definition. On the bottom here of the first page gives you kind of a definition and some of the information regarding phishing. So you can follow that later.
May I ask a question?
Oh yeah,
This
go
may
for
be
it.
For an IT person more than you.
Yeah,
But I think it's related to phishing.
Yep.
What I see more often is that I will get like bounce back emails saying that my email was undeliverable, and of course it's an email that I never sent.
Right.
I'm sure that means somebody has my email
Yes.
address. And
Yeah, unfortunately, your email is probably in the black market. And so your email has been sold to groups and they are using it, and then with that, some of that doesn't become as successful. So you get this odd message that it came from you. But yeah.
do you do anything about that? I mean, we're other.
No, I mean, yeah, you know, certainly make sure that the email that you are using has a very strong password system. And that means, you know, it's not your date of birth and your initials, the year you graduated from school, you know, I mean, it's things like, you know, I usually recommend certainly the alphanumeric with a number, you know, with a special character. And if you can make a sentence out of it where it's like, holy camole, that's a big, you know, message, it's going to be much harder to crack. So that's the first thing. Then if you have a very common email address, you know, Joe Smith, you know, unfortunately, I would try to maybe get something more creative or unique, because, you know, there's plenty of versions out there, but there's not a whole lot you can do once your email is in the black market list, unless you want to try to get in there and buy it back. No, I'm just kidding. Other questions about that? Okay, so let's talk here. We get a call from a vendor and you're past due. You know you're not past due. You remember writing the check, or you think you did, you've been so busy. You're pretty sure you put it in the mail. So you do a little research and you find out that, yeah, the check is cleared. But then you look closer at the check, and instead of being made out to ABC Company that you were paying, it's now made out to Detra Cleven. Unfortunately, all the supplies that are needed to write a check are available at our local office store. The right ink, the check stock. I've got the printer in my back office or my basement. I'm printing checks. So we end up with this counterfeit check. Businesses, there's not a whole lot that you can do to stop the fraud person from doing that. But there are ways that we can actually protect that account. So what do we do when that happens? First of all, you're certainly calling your bank and working through that process. But let's talk about ways that you can help with that situation. So make sure we're talking and working together. You want to reconcile your bank account. I know it's not a fun process. It's a pain, it's not fun, and it takes time. And you're doing everything for your business already, so reconciling your bank account is low on the fun list. But do it, because you won't catch things if you don't do it. You also will run into, there are rules around it. Every bank's slightly different, but there are rules around what your protections are when there is a problem, whether it's a reconciliation encoding issue. You know, you wrote the check for $50 and it got encoded for $500. You might catch that one bigger because it's money out. But the one where we have the check was washed and it was no longer made out to ABC, you're not going to catch that. Not quickly. So, but reconcile your bank account, because you won't know. Or you'll notice that maybe one of those checks in that range that you put out in the mail hasn't cleared at all. So again, just reconcile your bank account. Important to do. Take advantage of your bank systems. Online banking, you know, the days of waiting until that paper bank statement comes is of the past. You can get information every day on what's cleared. Now I know you're busy, so that's not something you're like, ooh, let's log in and see where we are. But sometimes we're logging in to see where we are to make sure that we know where we are. So use the banking services that are available. Most banks provide same-day information, so you'll be able to get that. And use your bank alerts. If you're busy, you can go on most banks. In fact, I don't know one that doesn't offer the ability to set up alerts. You can set those alerts up to be balance alerts when your balance falls below a certain amount. You can also be looking for a particular check. You can go in there and ask for that, or a deposit that you're expecting from somebody. And you can set it up to be an online notice. When you log in, you'll get the alert. They can push it to you through a text or through mobile apps. So there's ways that you can get information without always having to log in yourself. It can be pushed to you, be proactive. But use those. Those help keep track of what's going on in your bank account.
I have a friend that uses it to watch his wife. So every
That,
time she spends,
yep, exactly, whatever works. Direct deposit. Now, if you think about as you grow as a business, you're going to be writing lots of checks. You write vendor checks, you write payroll checks. Direct deposit is something that you can do for one employee or hundreds and thousands of employees. But it's one less check that has your information out and about. It's usually not, I mean, we talked about our little embezzlement example, but it's usually not your employees that are creating the fraud, but it's unfortunate how many places your check goes before it actually clears your bank account. Might be sitting on the dash of a car, might be gone to a check cashing company, and so it goes through their process. I'm not picking on the grocery stores or Walmart, but they might be taking it there to get it cashed. So again, more eyes that are seeing the routing number and account number on the bottom. So direct deposit is at least a way to mitigate that, and you can pay vendors that way. Little side note here, bill pay is a great source, but be reminded that really most of the time, unless it's a large organization that you are paying, most of the time bill pay is just the bank or the bill pay provider creating a paper check for you. So there's still a weariness about your account number possibly being on that. Again, some of the vendors do a coded account once it comes out of yours, but just be mindful of that. Sometimes people think bill pay means, oh, I'm not writing any checks. Well, you aren't, but you're telling the bank to write it on your behalf, so you still can have account number information floating out there.
Detra, one question
Yeah.
on direct deposit.
Yes.
Obviously, you get an email when you have direct deposit with your company.
Yep.
Say for those emails, should they be deleted? Or, I mean, obviously, now it's more than just the payroll people.
Right.
Now it's IT that has access to your bank account.
Correct.
So what do you do?
Well, usually on on that, you want to make sure you know your vendor, first of all. But yes, your IT people know. There are checks and balances within the network that runs, like NACHA, which is the National Association for Automated Clearinghouse. They don't have all the checks and balances. I can speak certainly for my bank, but if there were transactions added, like you always get paid, you bank this place, your routing number and account number is this, and your range of pay is within here. If there was something, and maybe we're all employees, so we're sending the file for the whole company. If those don't match up, there's going to be an alert in the back area to say something has gone awry with this payroll. It might be that we added a new person. That just enough can be an identifier, because behind the scenes there's a risk and fraud analytics running to say who's in that file, how much did they get paid. They don't see it. They're not going to look and go, ooh, that's who it is, until they look, but it does an analytics. We'll even look to see when that was transacted, what the IP address is, how long did it take them to do the transaction. So there are some protections, but you're right. I would say if you can, once you actually do the transaction and give the routing number and account number, then you no longer have to provide that in the email. You're just doing a dollar amount. So you're stripping away some of that confidential data from that email. Just saying, hey, this was transacted on this day for this amount, but not with the actual account information. So, does that help a little?
Sure. Thanks.
Okay. So then let's talk about that example that we used where the check was to ABC Company, but I got a hold of it and I washed it. Positive pay is the paper protection that banks offer. And again, this is generic. This isn't my bank. This is a bank will offer this. So it's something you can talk to your bank about. But really, positive pay, if you think about it in the banking world, we didn't know, the bank didn't know that you wrote that check to ABC Company. We saw you wrote a check, you had the money, we paid it. And unfortunately or fortunately, we don't have the little person in the back room with the green visor checking every paper check that comes in. They're electronically sent with the information from the bottom. We don't see a check, we get an image. Banks exchange images. So positive pay is where you as a company would send your check register into the bank. Most of the time with banks, you just log into their online banking and you just browse to find your check register and load it to the bank. The bank then keeps that information, and every time an item is presented on your account, they look to see, was it written? So we have check number 1215 for $50 to ABC Company, and it's going to look, all banks that offer it check the dollar amount, the date, and the account number and the amount. There's an advanced process that you can check the payee name. And you can have real time to the teller. So if I was sneaky and came in and cashed that check with you at the teller line, they're going to know, hey, that doesn't match. We show that that check isn't made to Detra Cleven. It's made to ABC Company. So it's really the way to team up with your bank to know what has cleared, what has written. The other side benefit to it is you actually can catch encoding errors. So if the bank that first got that item encoded it, remember we've got $50 here, but it encoded it for $500. Well, that's not going to match when you told me that you wrote it for $50. So therefore, it's going to alert. And the bank, if there is one, they're going to send you a notice. Hey, I wrote this check, or here's this check. It's coming through, it doesn't match. It may be a situation where it was a crazy Friday afternoon. You had somebody waiting for a check, and you just needed to get it done and needed to get out the door because you were on your way to another event. If that's the case, then you're going to tell the bank, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you about it in advance, go ahead and pay it. But if it's the Detra Cleven and ABC Company example, you're going to say, that's not my check. And that check's going to get returned. No loss to the company.
How much does that service normally range? I mean, I know
Range is between, I've seen, to be honest, I've seen it for absolutely free because it does benefit both the bank and the customer. But it ranges usually between $25, and I have seen it all the way up to $125, some of the larger banks. So, and then some of the larger banks, I can only speak for mine, but it's a flat, it's not a per item. Some of the larger banks do charge per item. So if they have to look at 10 checks, there's a cost of, 7 cents for every check kind of thing. But a lot of banks, it's just a flat, we're going to put this protection on your account and we're going to look. But it also is important that if you decide to do that, that you provide the information. You can certainly look at it every day after the fact, but it's that old theory of garbage in, garbage out. If the information isn't provided to the bank accurately, then it's going to be a lot of work for the bank because they're going to show everyone that doesn't match, and a lot of work for you because you're going to have to go back and check everyone to go, is that the right one? So that's the paper world. Make sure I'm keeping up here. Okay, so then we also have electronic positive pay, because we just talked about the paper positive pay of the world. But how many in here pay their taxes with the EFTPS website? Yeah. So you've already given somebody your bank account information. And you may have given it to your utilities. You may have given it to vendors. In fact, right now is kind of that hotbed in the banking world where we see larger businesses pushing the smaller businesses to go electronic because they don't want to get a check from you. They want to be able to draft your account or pay electronically because they're looking for efficiencies. And the new year's coming, and that's one of their focuses. So it doesn't mean that you can't give your bank account information to other people, but it is advantageous for you to protect your account. You can actually put a block or a filter on your account. Maybe you've got an account that's a reserve account that should never have an electronic transaction. You don't pay taxes. You don't do anything with a PayPal account or any vendors. If that's the case, then you'll put a complete block on it. You'll tell the bank, I never should have anybody draft that account. But maybe we've got our operating account that we pay taxes in. Maybe there's a vendor, maybe you've got an office supply store that knows that they are going to bring paper every so often and debit your account. Or maybe you have a postage with Pitney Bowes and they will charge your account for the postage meter. You can actually tell the bank, these are acceptable people, and you can even set dollar amount limits. Maybe your taxes should be never more than a certain dollar amount. So if you or the IRS makes a mistake and gets a fat finger and adds an extra zero, that you're going to be able to catch it. Again, the bank is going to have it set up in their system, what's acceptable, what's the dollar amount, what's the parameters. If it doesn't match, they're going to send you a notice. The key here on the electronic positive authorization or the electronic positive pay side of the world is that the regulations that govern those transactions are different from business and consumer. In the business world, you have 48 hours to notify the bank that you have an item that is discrepant or fraudulent. 48 hours really is more like 24 because it happens during the day. Unless you are online and checking your account, you don't see it happening. You log in the next morning, you see this item that you might or might not recognize, and then you have 24 hours to figure out what's going on. Let's talk about a real live example. It's a little blurry because I couldn't find the best picture. But prepaid cell phones. There was a ring not that long ago where people were going in and they were buying prepaid cell phones and paying for phones on kiosks. And they were doing it on about the 5th or 6th of the month, so everybody's busy reconciling their previous month. They're not clearing out your account. About $85 was the average transaction, but they would be debiting accounts of names in the community. Because these businesses were growing, they had a great site, people knew their names, so they went ahead and were able to get account numbers. So they would go in, pay for those, and it would show up on the statement, of course, the next day that they were drafting for the account. Now, I'm not going to pick on anyone, but at our bank we use Verizon. So if somebody that was on the bank account had a Verizon phone, now I have 48 hours, which really now I have 24 because this happened and I'm looking at it today, to go and say, did you need a new battery or a charger? Did you need to go to the store? Did you? Oh, you're on vacation today, so I can't get you. So it takes me all day, and I don't get everybody. So I don't report that it's fraudulent because I don't know it is. So it doesn't mean that you can't have people draft your account. But at this point, it becomes a business decision between you and your bank on whether you're going to get the money back. Because from a legal standpoint, there isn't a regulation. It falls under the UCC codes, and it's reasonable. You know, we got my attorney in here, so I'm not going to take over that. But it's a business decision to decide whether or not you're going to get your money back. So again, something to be mindful of in the process. Go ahead.
In the bank that there's potential that you're investigating it, does it still have to be completed?
Well, you have to actually report it. Then they'll start the process. You need affidavits that if you don't know it is, you certainly want to probably alert them because somebody has your account number, and that doesn't mean that tomorrow it's not going to be a different situation. So always better to work with your bank partner if you suspect something. But yes, it's a 48-hour window, so that's why that electronic positive authorization or electronic blocking can be very important in the picture. So, any questions on that? Because we're going to touch on credit card fraud, which can be fun or not fun, depends on which angle you want. So we've all heard about the fraud, and unfortunately there are more than we ever hear about with organizations that might not be as large as the Target and the Home Depots. But credit card fraud is rampant, but there are some changes that are coming that are intended to at least mitigate some of that fraud. So I want to at least let you know what those changes are. They are consistently changing, so I would say as far as a subject matter expert, I continue to grow in it as well because there's so much new news out there on who's adopting it, who's going with that. So you've got credit card transactions and credit card fraud, and your actual physical credit cards are beginning to make a change. Does anybody have an EMV card or a chip card now in their wallet? They're coming. And so the difference here, and again, you've got your little itty bitty, is most of you probably have your debit card or your credit card today that actually has the magnetic strip on the back. You'll hear that called CVV, and I don't want to get into all the technical, but the information is actually on your card in the magnetic strip, and that matched with the security code when you log in or somebody wants that extra 3-digit code. That's your CVV number. In today's world, you'll swipe your card in a terminal, and that terminal actually captures the information from the card. So you talk about the Target breaches, Home Depot, you know, the information was in the systems. And so it's sitting in that system, so anywhere between the card and the issuer, the bank that your card is with, in that process, that information has been captured. You know, unfortunately, you hear Target, it was because their HVAC company was able to get in and somebody infiltrated that. Home Depot, it hit all the stores, but it was at their self-service checkout area, not their regular pay terminals. So it just gets in, and they were able to infiltrate that system and get the card information. So the new cards are going to this magnetic EMV chip, and EMV is Europay, MasterCard, and Visa. So they've all been working together because this is a technology that's been in Europe, and they did see a drastic decrease in actual card-present fraud. What I mean by that is there's still fraud in the person trying to use an account for a card that's not present at the transaction face-to-face, but they have seen a big drop. The difference there is the information is actually slid into the mechanism or the machine. It stays in there. The data from the card is then encrypted, so it's not staying in the machine. It's got encrypting, and then that encryption is sent to the bank or to the issuer of the card. And so that data never leaves the card and is stored in the machine. The big thing for people to remember, and if you are a business that takes credit cards today, is that going forward, your equipment that you have, the ones that right now take the slide, will have to be compliant to take this chip. The time frame of that is October 1st of 2015. And the big deal of that is that if you do not make the change, the EMV chip or cards will still have a magnetic strip, so you're able to take the card in your environment. But the big deal is that if you think about it right now, Visa, MasterCard, the card holder takes the liability if that was a fraudulent card. You know, if you followed your procedure, took the card, you're not on the hook for the loss of it. Going forward, though, if you are not compliant with a machine that will take EMV, the company is liable for that transaction in any fraud. So everybody will be switching to that. And then you have the Apple Pay side, which again, I didn't put too much up there because that is constantly changing on who's on board, who's dropping out, but that's that near field communication. And again, the equipment will be allowed to be able to take the Apple Pay, which is a tokenization process. Again, the data from the card's not in the system, but it's a tokenization that follows that card transaction.
That's really my question too, because now everybody's using the Square.
Exactly.
You know,
Well, and the Square, yes.
Square on the iPad or on the
Yes,
phone.
and I would tell people that have the Square that you may want to, the Square is probably one of the least secure mechanisms. There are other technologies out there that operate like the Square, but the Square is probably the most fraud prevalent because it doesn't encrypt anything. And there are other swipers that work with a low cost, but the Square is a very dangerous one. And the Square will be changing to be able to handle EMV going forward, and that'll be that near field communication. The hard part is some of these timelines, of course, from a regulation standpoint and a policy standpoint have been set, but some of the processes have not been necessarily able to keep up because there's, there's cost involved. I mean, if you're looking at changing your equipment to be able to take cards, there's some cost to that. Most of the vendors that I have talked to all are selling the EMV enabled, but everybody's out there. And I would just hesitate whether you use your bank and go through, but there are a lot of people that have been dropped in areas that are representing credit card processors that have been dropped in because they know that everybody is going to have to make this switch. So as you always look at your partners and make sure you find good partners to work with your business, just be mindful of that because you may have a great deal, but that person might be out of, I'm picking on places, but St. Louis, you will never see that person again. They've been brought into this market just to try to sell credit cards. Get the bang for the buck, get the business, and then they're out the door. And I've seen that already. There have been businesses, in fact, Gate City right now must be the hot spot for credit card transactions because they've moved people in to work in that market and just go tell everybody that they need to switch their processing because they do. I mean, this isn't a made-up date, but they're now, and it's really it's a valid company, but it's not one that you would probably necessarily partner with because you're not going to have a relationship with them. So just be mindful as this becomes the next hotbed of discussion on what you should do, that you think about that. So work with whatever bank you're with because they probably have somebody that they would at least recommend that would be a good resource for you. And if you need somebody, I've got plenty of connections that can help you too. So, questions for me. The last page you have, and I'm not going to go to each of them, but if you want to learn more, the first one is probably one of my favorite websites, and you can sign up for information from them, but it's a man named Brian Krebs. I follow him, and he is usually the first to break news on fraud or breaches of things before it ever hits the mainstream. I probably knew a week in advance that Target was going down with a huge breach. Home Depot, the information behind it. So, and some of it's just what's going on in the industry. Usually what you'll get is a quick paragraph that tells you what his blog or his information is about that day. If it's in interest to you, keep going. If not, you delete it and move on for the day. But a great resource. And then some of the others are, information on identity theft, which we didn't cover a lot, but that is a hotbed of things that you can do to protect yourself, not giving out your information, social security numbers, things of that nature. And then the last one on check fraud has some great resources about even what type of paper to run on, what kind of things to look for in the check world. So.
Is it true credit cards are safer than debit cards?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I would recommend that because the way they are governed, even going forward, the way they're governed with the liability. Now, debit cards certainly have some protection, but often they're tied to the bigger pot of money. They're tied to your checking account, where the credit card, if you can manage yourself well and pay it off every month, you're really using somebody else's money with the arm protection, and then you get the Visa protection that even gives you a little bit more, gives you about the same, but on debit cards, you usually have a floor of a dollar amount if it's not reported right, and on the credit card side, you've got a little bit wider umbrella to be able to push against something that isn't a valid transaction. But yes, good point.
I have a question like debit cards, credit cards, and restaurants specifically.
Yes.
Because of the tipping aspect.
Yes.
Because when I go to reconcile my account.
Yes.
Personal aspect, but also being a businesses
Oh, yes.
take people to lunch. And I'm like, that does not match. And then I'm
Right.
looking, it's usually the amount pre-gratuity.
Yes.
So, and sometimes it's several days up to a week before that gratuity. I mean, it's what is
Yeah.
the aspect as far as too? And also just to kind of add to that, I did
Yep.
have someone, I know that they took someone to lunch. The other person said, oh, please, please, please let me leave the tip, and left, like a $5 bill as a
Yeah.
tip. The person did not make a
line, and so they ended up paying the tip as well.
The
server.
was dishonest.
Yes.
And then wrote it in, and then also, I don't know if they wrote it in, but they were able to.
Oh yeah, because and that's one of the things, those are all problems that still exist, and they'll exist to a certain extent, but the EMV will pretty much require the restaurants to actually bring a device to your table to clear out, as opposed to where you give your card to somebody and you hope that they're not selling it in the back. I mean, I've got more stories than you need to know as far as what fraud rings have happened here, is selling account numbers and things.
That's quite
Yes.
frequently reconciling my personal account
Yeah.
for business lunches and like that.
Yeah.
Like
Now,
84, that doesn't match, because I always, and I don't know if anyone wants to use this trick, always even it out. Even
Right,
if my
so-
check is $23.99, and I'll tip, $4 and a penny.
Right, just to get it even.
I know every
Yeah.
transaction of mine is even if something comes out weird.
Well, a lot of restaurants will run that transaction before they add their tip based on how they're paying their servers at the end of the day, so it's a separate run. So sometimes that's why it'll show as an odd transaction on your account. And then sometimes you just have the dishonest person, unfortunately, in there. But there's not a whole lot you can do on the dishonest side from that standpoint. But you can always work with your bank or the issuer to dispute it if it's something that's drastic.
Well, those restaurant devices store, I guess when it goes
Well,
to the
right, it doesn't
won't.
store.
But like
Right.
Chili's now has those devices.
Right,
there
but it's
still.
still storing the information in those devices.
It
The
is.
devices are actually changing, yes,
Okay.
the info
So,
is in
If I
there.
went into Chili's and took one of those devices, potentially.
You
actually-
potentially could be great,
Okay.
so.
I wondered about
The other thing, though, just to let you know on that date for the 2015, and I know I'm probably taking way more than my normal time here, is that the pay at the pumps, which also have their own issues with skimmers and things of that nature, they have been granted till 2017 to be able to take EMV. So it's coming, but again, unfortunately, there's some technology hindrances to be able to change all these pumps out, and they've got great lobbyists. So they've been able to push to 2017 for that type of transaction, so your pay at the pumps, that's probably the most common that we know of, have a little bit longer to be EMV enabled, so with the liability switch. Other questions for me?
This is another odd question. I had a customer give me his credit card, so, I needed to give it to our department.
Yep.
Took a picture of the card.
Yeah.
Never a good idea to text,
No.
is it?
No.
Or email?
No.
Okay. Just want to make sure.
Let me sit for a second. No. In fact, one thing, and again, we can talk offline, but there may be a way within your organization, if you're going to start taking credit cards, that you can actually do that from your terminal with it's a secure method where you'll put it into a secure base and be able to get that. And it really won't capture it in your world. It'll be housed out there. But there's still a lot of, like I mentioned, for people, fraud is a full-time job for them. So for all these new things that are coming, the fraudsters are working just as hard to figure out a way to hack into it. So it's a running game, and I'm not sure who will ultimately win, but unfortunately, everybody's trying to take the next steps, like EMV or just protecting your information. Positive Pay. Positive Pay started out where nobody checked the payee name because it was like check number, dollar amount, and then the fraudsters found a way to take that same check for $50 and make it to a new person. And if you ever get to see, I've actually been able to see them wash the check, the technology where they wash to get the exact signature, to get the way that looks like a check. And you'd be surprised how many checks those people can make that look really almost better than the original. Crisper print, a little bit thicker paper quality, and they look good. I even had a business owner that had 2 checks, and I asked them to pick the fraudulent check, and they picked their check because the other one looked better. So
What's your opinion about PayPal? Like right now, my website just
feeds to PayPal.
pretty decent security.
They do have pretty decent security. I wouldn't put them any lower. I would say that's fine. And usually for your end user, as the consumer, they're good with kind of having one place that they're, one account, because that's one of the things that they actually recommend, is that if you're using accounts, like the main example they use is social media. You log in with your Facebook account to the other areas. That surprised me, but that came from the Homeland Security area, that they say to use that single portal, because if something is breached, you've got a better way to protect. There was an article that actually came out this week, which surprised me a little, but they said with some of the technologies out there that's a better way. But yeah, PayPal's really pretty good. That doesn't mean that they won't be the next breach, but follow Brian Krebs, you'll know about it before the mainstream media.